And we recognize that under some circumstances, if we wanted to propose an amendment to the entitlement contracts, the contract requires 100% participant approval. We have found a path respecting the FMPA contracts, but avoiding the possibility of a veto from one participant. The city will need approval of the board of directors of FMPA as to the entitlement contracts, the assumption of the entitlement contracts by OUC, and the city will need approval of FMPA's ARP executive committee for waivers we're proposing under the ARP contract. These governing FMPA bodies include representatives of the city's fellow municipal participants. So it's not like we're trying to get around the consent or approval of the municipal participants. The city will have an opportunity to make its case for the waivers and approvals to both bodies so it can proceed with the sale to FPL. The participants will have an opportunity to vote on approval of the requests. We believe the solutions proposed will protect bondholders and participants and will enhance their credit position with respect to the FMPA bonds. And we're working with FMPA now to obtain the support of FMPA's outside counsel, their internal counsel, and their management team so we can then be in a position to present specific proposals to the FMPA board and the FMPA ARP executive committee. So I'm going to get into details of the contracts now, but first I want to address the tax issues. And again, the overview that as FMPA, the tax issues relate to the 3-year layoff that's been proposed, that's been as reflected under the existing agreement between the city and OUC, between OUC and FPL, where OUC would sell power that it purchases from FMPA under the Stanton and Stanton 2 contracts for 3 years, but no later than December 31, 2017. As FMPA has acknowledged, the tax issues are complicated, and we agree. FMPA has assured us it will work with the city to find solutions, provided a private letter ruling request is submitted to the IRS to provide comfort with respect to the continued tax-exempt status of the FMPA bonds. Under the terms of the existing agreement, I mentioned this, the 3-year period but not to exceed December 31, 2017, we've been referring to this existing agreement as Plan A because Plan B has surfaced. But I want to correct a misimpression that we've read in the press. 3 law firms, including Edward Wildman, have agreed that the 3-year private use exemption under the federal tax code permits the contemplated sale of power from OUC to FPL. Our firm was and remains willing to issue a tax opinion on Plan A. There was a difference of opinion in our discussions with FMPA counsel as to the interpretation of the IRS rules relating to fair market value requirements. We had extensive discussions about the structure of a private letter ruling request to be submitted to the IRS. However, we began to be concerned about this path as to whether there was a path around FMPA's counsel's position on their interpretation of this regulation regarding fair market value. It didn't seem to make much sense to us to submit a private letter ruling request to the IRS if we couldn't achieve consensus on how it should be worded. As a result, OUC and FPL began to discuss an alternative structure for the sale of power from OUC to FPL, call it Plan B. This was presented as a very rough outline to FMPA in one of our meetings. This plan is designed to eliminate concerns about a direct sale of the FMPA power from OUC to FPL. It would involve either a system purchase or a unit purchase of power by FPL from OUC as opposed to the resale directly to FPL of the power that OUC would purchase from FMPA in the city's stead. So right now we have specialists at FPL and OUC working on this term sheet for the plan, in particular addressing concerns that were raised by FMPA Tax and Bond Council at our last meeting. And once the term sheet is finished, the game plan is for the tax lawyers from all parties, FMPA, FPL, OUC, and the city, to meet to begin drafting the outline of the private letter ruling request for this alternative approach. I want to move now to the entitlement contracts. OUC has agreed, as I've said, to assume all of the city's obligations under the power sale and support contracts for Stanton, Stanton 2, and St. Lucie. Section 28A of the power sale contracts contemplates an assignment of its rights under the contracts by the city, which could be accomplished without 100% participant approval, provided that the city would remain contingently liable for the assignee's performance. We've had that discussion here before. Such an assignment, similar to what happened with Homestead, would require approval of the FMPA Board of Directors as well as the various parties affiliated with the bond transactions. Again, while we view OUC's proposed assumption of the city's obligations as an improvement for the bondholders, given OUC's superior credit rating and customer base of over 250,000. And FMPA acknowledges OUC will be a great partner as a new participant in the FMPA projects, but still FMPA is focused on that risk, however small, that OUC might default on its obligations under the assumed entitlement contracts. Even FPA recognizes the risk is very remote, but their concern under the contract is the city will no longer have electric utility revenues to support any contingent obligations it would be required to make under Section 28A to step in if OUC defaults. Section 28C of the contracts contemplates a sale or disposition of a member's electric utility system with the same types of approvals, but again, not with 100% approval of all participants. If the sale if the sale transaction fit the narrow scope of the contemplated sale in the contracts, i.e., if it was a sale from the city of Vero Beach to another member of FMPA. But we know that's not our transaction. In either case, the transaction must be approved by the FMPA's board of directors, the bond trustees, the bond insurance companies, the bond rating agencies, and all such parties must be comfortable that the transaction won't jeopardize the tax-exempt status of the bonds or the ability of FMPA to continue to make payment of the bonds. But because this proposed transaction does not fit squarely into the disposition contemplated under 28C, FMPA has taken the position that we would need to amend the agreements with FMPA and give all participants, amend it and come up with some kind of amendment worded that would contemplate the potential sale in our particular facts, and then somehow offer every other participant a similar amendment or the right to waive that kind of amendment. It would get extremely complicated. And the risk, again, for the city is that we could go through this process, obtain all the third-party approvals, the regulatory approvals from all of the bond-related parties, and for whatever reason, one municipality, one participant decides to vote against us, and we're stymied. But FMPA has taken the position, and we understand this, that they don't want to deviate from their contracts. So we have proposed an alternative path which is specifically permitted and contemplated under the contracts with FMPA. Section 29B and C gives FMPA the right to terminate the entitlement contracts. The same protections are contemplated. FMPA can't terminate a contract if it would jeopardize the tax-exempt status of the bonds or credit for repayment of the bonds. However, here there's no requirement. It wouldn't be an amendment. There would be no requirement for 100% participant approval because it wouldn't be an amendment. It would be a termination of the contract. And the terms of the city's proposal are outlined in the draft consent agreement that we sent to you last night. So here's the path that we proposed. FMPA would agree to terminate the entitlement contracts and to enter into new identical contracts between FMPA and OUC, effective upon the closing and subject to the approvals of the bond parties. The city would provide or arrange for the following credit enhancements, and obviously all of this is subject to City Council approval. We haven't made any commitments. This is a proposal. A, contract insurance from a reputable bond insurance company, ensuring OUC's contractual obligations under the entitlement contracts up to a cap number equivalent to the city's current pro rata obligations with respect to the FMPA contracts and bonds. We've had discussions with a national financial advisor who spoke with 2 potential insurance companies, so we know this is feasible. We expect the cost to be similar to bond insurance, but we'll want a financial advisor to collect bids and help the city negotiate this type of insurance. I appreciated your question, Mr. Winger, to Pat Bryant about the cost. Also, as part of our proposal, the city would sign a limited recourse guarantee and a pledge and security agreement to benefit FMPA. And the city would pledge collateral. FMPA's recourse against the city would be limited to the collateral provided, including 1, a pledge of city electric franchise fee revenues. FPL would subordinate its current right to offset any claims it might have under the purchase agreement against franchise revenues, so FMPA could come first if OUC ever went bankrupt. And a pledge of city utility tax revenues after payment of the ARP termination fee, which I'll address in a few minutes. The city would be, as we proposed, the city would be free to spend this franchise tax revenue and utility tax revenue as received, and only if there was an event of default by OUC would the funds then be set aside until the default was resolved. Once it was cured, the revenue would be released and the city would be free to use the revenues as received. So if the remote risk of an OUC default ever materializes, we have proposed that FMPA would agree to pursue its rights in the following order. First, to move against OUC. Why haven't you paid your invoice? Send us a check. Second, against the contract insurance carrier. And then, only then, if that doesn't work out, if the insurance carrier also goes bankrupt. Third, against the city's pledge of franchise fee revenues. And if that proves insufficient, then fourth, against the pledge of utility tax revenues. So these credit enhancements, while we don't believe they would ever be necessary, these credit enhancements will put the bondholders and other FMPA participants in a better credit position than they are in now, with the city of Vero Beach as a fellow participant. The termination of the city's contracts and the execution of new identical contracts between FMPA and OUC is permitted under the existing contracts and can be approved by the FMPA Board of Directors. Although we would not be proceeding with an assignment under Section 28A, we propose that the city would still offer the pledge and guarantee agreement secured by these credit enhancements to ensure participants and FMPA the status quo credit position will not be put at risk by this sale to FPL. And in fact, the participants will have an enhanced and improved position. So I'm going to move on to the all requirements project contract issues. The primary issue with the all requirements contract is timing. Even though the city has moved to zero CROD and delivered its notice of withdrawal, the contract has a covenant requiring the city to maintain its electric utility system. This is the reason from the beginning we knew that we were going to ask, that the city would be asking FMPA for an accelerated withdrawal date, for a waiver of the 3-year notice. And this is in order to avoid a breach of contract, so that we could schedule the actual withdrawal, the termination date, on or before the projected closing of the sale to FPL. So we all know, if not for the CC glitch, the notice of termination that was sent in 2012 to FMPA, the withdrawal date would have been September 30, 2015, not September 30, 2016. When the city sent its CROD notice to FMPA, the city did not copy any participants when it sent that letter, as contemplated, but FMPA accepted the city's notice and sent a copy of the notice to all of the participants. And we've discussed this with FMPA, and given this precedent, we have asked FMPA to accept the initial 3-year 2012 notice, setting the withdrawal date at September 30, 2015, and FMPA is considering this request. If the city is in a position to close the transaction with FPL prior to September 30, 2015, we have asked FMPA, through its executive committee, to approve a waiver of the full 3-year withdrawal period. FMPA Council has a difference of opinion. They interpret this request for a waiver as a request for an amendment of the provision calling for 3 years, and such waiver requiring the consent of 100% of the ARP participants. And yes, there is a provision in the contract that says if you want to modify or amend the contract, you need to go to all of the participants. But as we read the contract, in particular Section 24 contemplates that there might be waivers of rights by any party, including FMPA. So we definitely have a difference of opinion on this issue, and we hope that we'll be able to persuade FMPA to accept our position. We're not asking for an amendment. We're just asking for a potential shortening of the notice period. And if the waiver is granted, the withdrawal date would be accelerated to on or before the closing date, and any withdrawal payment due would be paid by the city to FMPA. So there's been a lot of talk in the press about requesting this waiver, and wouldn't this hurt other participants, which I really believe is a lot of hogwash. Let me make sure I'm keeping up on my slides. But in order to address any concerns of FMPA or the city's fellow ARP participants with respect to this proposed acceleration, this waiver, we propose that the city would make a withdrawal payment as required under the ARP contract upon the earlier of September 30, 2015, or the requested accelerated withdrawal date, but also provide a pledge of its utility taxes to secure a potential additional supplemental payment representing incremental withdrawal costs, if any, payable under the ARP termination covenants for the additional waived time period to September 30, 2016. What those costs might be during that additional time frame, we don't know. The city is not purchasing power under the ARP contract. But this will give other ARP participants assurance that the city intends to pay 100% of its potential termination costs, as if the ARP was terminated on September 30, 2016. There will be no possible harm or disadvantage to any of the other ARP participants resulting from FMPA's waiver of any portion of the 3-year notice period. So we are assuming a termination payment, if any, will relate primarily to timeframes prior to the City of Vero Beach's move to a CROD under the ARP, and accordingly, if there's a termination payment due under the contract, most of it will be calculable by FMPA in 2014 or 2015. But to the extent any supplemental or incremental amount would be payable, if calculated as late as September 30, 2016, the City of Vero Beach would pay the supplemental amount. Let's see. So as I said, I mentioned the accounts in the media, but in consultation with Jim O'Connor, we proposed the supplemental termination payment, if required, to ensure other ARP participants the city will not achieve an advantage over them by withdrawing earlier than planned. Okay, I'm jumping up to 17. A lot of attention has been directed to the Taylor swap liabilities in the media and elsewhere, to these liabilities incurred by FMPA under the ARP, especially in the weeks leading up to the public referendum. Well, I view this as simply a major distraction for several reasons, which I'll enunciate. I will address it now and explain the difference of opinion between us as counsel to the city and FMPA and its counsel. First, if there is exposure to the city for any portion of the Taylor swaps under the terms of the ARP, the city would have this liability, whether or not the transaction with FPL was on the table. The deal with FPL will not trigger this exposure or increase it in any way. This is why I see this as a total distraction. Second, neither we nor, to my knowledge, any city official has told FMPA or anyone else that the city is trying to avoid any liability it may have for ARP termination costs. None of our proposals for resolving the ARP termination have hinted at any attempt by the city to skate on its contractual obligations. Third, we all hope that FMPA's continuing efforts to resolve exposure for any participant under the Taylor swaps will be successful, in which event this whole debate about Taylor swaps becomes moot. Because city officials raised questions about the Taylor swaps, we reviewed the all requirements contract and could not find any basis for allocating any share of the potential cost to the city of Vero Beach, since it is at zero CROD and will be withdrawing from the ARP. We wrote to FMPA to ask them for documentation establishing the city's liability for a share of any Taylor swap exposure as part of any withdrawal payment. FMPA responded with an email and sent us a copy. We also asked for a copy of the 2006 Integrated Resource Plan, which outlined plans for the Taylor Energy Center. FMPA responded with an email, sent us a copy of the plan. That was dated July 6, 2006. Counsel to FMPA, Art McMahon, expressed his view in the email that the Taylor swaps are stranded costs for which all participants bear risk, including the city of Vero Beach, even though it is withdrawing from the ARP. So we reviewed the Integrated Resource Plan. We also reviewed a copy of a letter dated September 10, 2010, from FMPA to Fort Pierce, in which FMPA answered questions about the potential termination costs if Fort Pierce were to withdraw withdraw from the ARP. We also found a copy of a letter dated October 4th, 2010, from the general manager of FMPA to John Lee as utility director for the city of Vero Beach. He was responding to questions from John Lee about the cost that would be incurred if the city were to withdraw from the ARP. Those letters and the plan all indicate to us that swaps are treated by FMPA as part of debt service, and thus, for the city of Vero Beach, there would be no termination payment exposure under that theory. The termination cost, Section 29C1 of the ARP, limits termination liability for bonds and debt service using a formula tied to power usage on the date of notice of termination and power usage on the date of withdrawal. Since the city was at 0 CROD on the date of its notice and will be at 0 CROD through the date of termination, in our view, the city's liability for Taylor swaps would be 0. The plan also demonstrates that FMPA was planning on the city's withdrawal from the ARP. FMPA believes there could be exposure to the city of Vero Beach on the theory that swaps related to outstanding bonds would be treated as debt service, but swaps relating to future bonds and future projects, like the Taylor swaps, would be treated as stranded costs. There was no such distinction made in FMPA's letter to Fort Pierce. And in our last call with FMPA, we acknowledged that we have a difference of opinion on this point as to how the swaps should be treated, either for outstanding bonds or future bonds. Is it debt service or not? If it was to be treated as a stranded cost, then Section 29C2 applies. And there would be exposure to the city of Vero Beach for stranded costs if FMPA was unable to use resources it acquired, which FMPA anticipated it would use to supply power to the city of Vero Beach. So in this section, the question is whether FMPA incurred the Taylor swap liabilities in anticipation the Taylor Energy Center would be built and used to provide power to the city of Vero Beach under the All Requirements contract. The 2006 Integrated Resource Plan specifically, and this was written by FMPA, specifically noted that the city of Vero Beach was withdrawing from the All Requirements contract. Its power purchases were specifically excluded from several charts on projected power use in the plan. FMPA told us Vero Beach may have had to purchase power from the Taylor Energy Center if it could not acquire sufficient power elsewhere during peak usage periods. But we do not understand, however, how FMPA could have reasonably relied on the city's continued participation under the All Requirements contract to purchase power from the proposed Taylor Energy Center because FMPA knew the city was planning to withdraw, and that was reflected in the Integrated Resource Plan. In any event, this, we have a difference of opinion now, but this will have to be worked out, and the city is not taking, at least we're not advancing any position on behalf of the city that it's going to try and escape its obligations. If there's an illegal obligation to make a payment, a termination payment for any stranded costs under the All Requirements contract, the city is going to make the payment. Felt compelled to go through that analysis because of what's been said in the press, and I thought you deserved the explanation. 19. So in summary on the All Requirements, our proposal to FMPA presents an opportunity for the city to withdraw on September 30 from the All Requirements contract as originally intended, with payment of any termination fee then due, plus provision of security for an additional supplemental stranded cost payment, if any, calculated with respect to the period from October 1 to September 30, 2016. The city's fellow ARP participants will not be harmed in any way by the early withdrawal. Our proposal also presents an opportunity for the city to withdraw earlier than September 30, 2015, if FMPA's ARP Executive Committee will approve waiver of the full notice period. Under this scenario, the city would pay the termination fee then due on the accelerated termination date, plus provide security for an additional incremental stranded cost payment, if any, covering that period through September 30, 2016. And again, the participants will not be harmed in any way. So we don't see a need for an amendment to the ARP to incorporate this waiver request. The FMPA ARP Executive Committee includes many representatives of the ARP participants. The city will need to obtain approval of the Executive Committee. However, following this proposed path, the city will not need to worry about a veto vote from one participant. In conclusion, and a couple more remarks, we believe the city has proposed viable commercial solutions to address the risks and concerns which have been noted and raised by FMPA throughout our negotiations, as well as the risks noted by the city. AR participants will not be harmed and will maintain their current position. Entitlement project participants will be in a better credit position than the status quo, with OUC as a substitute member, plus additional credit enhancements offered by the city. This is a path for moving ahead. Our next steps with FMPA, vacation time. FMPA is not available for calls or meetings during the month of July, although we may have some discussions with FMPA council. But we may not be able to confer or meet with the FMPA team until August. And in the meantime, we're going to follow up with their counsel, and we're also going to follow up with tax counsel on the private letter ruling to address the tax issues. So I can't predict how soon we're going to finalize this path. I estimated, I told Jim, June 30 when the question was raised, because we were making progress and we had meetings scheduled with FMPA and other parties. A lot of time was spent, however, on the tax issues and this move from Plan A to Plan B. But given this path that we have proposed, we could theoretically reach a consensus with FMPA in early August, while simultaneously working on the private letter ruling. It could take anywhere from 6 to 12 months to obtain the approvals that we still need, including an IRS letter ruling. But that's the end of my planned remarks, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Yeah, I have some brief questions, John.
Sure.
This is background for the public, and I think it's important. I will call it basic diametrics. If you look at the position that the five parties to this are in, FMPA is in a position currently, and if nothing happens, where they have no bond risk, they have no complications to their life, and they're getting paid 50%, or roughly 50% over the market price for the electrons they sell us, for what it's worth. And when people wonder why power is high. Okay, OUC gets paid 50% over market for the electrons, the agreement that we got into 2.5 years ago. They're able to sell the electric, which there's no market for in Florida. They use our gas rights, which they need at no cost. And ultimately, they're going to be enriched under Plan A, which I understand is off the table now. They were going to get the equivalent of $94 million. John, you and your firm are receiving about $60,000 a month for as long as this continues.
$94 million? Where'd you get that?
Well, the $94 million is the $30 million that they were going to get under the power assignment. It's the $10 million value of the gas. It's the $34 million settlement with them, and the $20 million or the $34 million, it adds up to 94. Trust me. Florida Power and Light.
Well, but
no, wait a second, John. I listened to your comments. I want you to listen to mine. I have a more fundamental point.
Mr. Winger, you really need to.
No, wait a second. I have a more fundamental point. Florida Power and Light is being paid $200,000 a month to transmit our power on which they're making a profit, and they have no costs. They have no costs for any of their lawyers, anything they spend, except donations. All that goes into their rate calculation. The point I want to make is you people out there are on the hook for $2 million a month the longer this thing goes on, and you're on the hook for the lawyers' fees, whatever they are, $50,000 or $60,000. I understand we have another bill from Nixon Peabody, the second one, for $75,000. So the point is, I'll ask you a couple questions with that background. Have you discussed with FMPA that there is no member approval? In other words, the cities don't have to approve whether it's the ARP or whether it's the power supply agreement. Has that been discussed with them?
we outlined this proposal to them on our last conference call. So we laid it out there, and they said they would consider it.
Okay, they said they would consider it. They have not agreed to it.
They haven't responded, let's put it that way.
And since 2006, it was required.
They said it was required because they were focused on an amendment of the entitlement contracts, yes.
So you're telling us now that we have the possibility of having a route forward, a plan B, I guess this is, in August, a possibility. Is that correct?
I'm telling you there's another path to an amendment. There's a path to terminate and substitute new contracts, yes.
And the observation is my interest is in getting a deal done and getting the people off the hook for the $2 million a month and the $60,000 legal fee. And what you sounded like,
So you're in favor of the transaction?
I've always been in favor of the transaction. You know that from the very start when I first met you. But let me say this with all due respect. Maybe it comes from watching too much television. But you sounded like you were prosecuting a case against some other parties in this particular thing. And that could get us involved in a long, drawn-out situation. Let me put it to you this way. The people of Vero Beach are involved in I think, are pawns. They're paying money. It's costing them money. It costs no other player any money. They're all making money on you. And I don't think that's right. So, John, thank you.
Mr. Kramer, you have any comments?
Bottom line, we don't have a deal. I think you made us sign a contract. You're still negotiating. I don't see how you, in a professional manner, because I remember you saying you won't let Vero Beach sign a bad deal. Well, we signed a deal, and we're still negotiating. I don't see how, in your professional opinion, you can say whether it's good or bad.
I'm not sure what the question is.
It's more of a comment. We're still negotiating a deal. We're 3 years into this. We've gotten nowhere. I'm up here to get the rates down. I've got a utilities commission that shuts me down. I've got 3 people on my right that shuts me down. I want the rates down. What you're suggesting just continues this process.
Well, Mr. Kramer, you seem to have a lot of influence at FMPA. Perhaps you could help us.
My influence at FMPA is really on the questions, because I asked the questions.
But I'm serious.
No. I asked them questions. Council has made sure that I can't ask you questions. And I got a city manager that's a cheerleader for the 3 people over here. I can't get any information out on this deal unless I talk to FMPA.
You can call me anytime.
No, these 3 people said no.
No, I don't remember ever having telling you that you can't.
I remember Dick Winger called, and then you guys got on his case because he's racking up bills that John Igo sent us.
That was for calling me before the city council, I believe. But I can talk to any one of the city council members individually. And if you have ideas for how we can bring this home and work with Fred Bryant at FMPA to bring it home without the risks to the city. What I'm trying to do, Mr. Kramers, look, negotiating the deal with FPL, that was complicated. But I told you all along that getting the approvals through FMPA was going to be a complicated process. And it has been. And FMPA has a justifiable concern about protecting its bondholders and the tax-exempt status of the bonds, admittedly. But what we're trying to do is get them to agree that within the confines of their contracts, there's a way to go through this approval process without putting the whole transaction and all of the money that the city has spent at risk that one participant might decide, for whatever reason, to vote against the transaction.
Well, I don't see how you dictating to FMPA how their business is going to help. I really
I'm
don't.
not dictating to FMPA.
Your language that you say that you think, you believe, theory, different of opinions. We don't see a need. I mean,
What do you mean dictating? I mean, this is all. Look. I didn't want to make this in public, but somehow everything that happens when we have meetings at FMPA ends up in the press, and you're getting one side of the story. So,
Mr. Igo, this is government. This is
Yes,
sunshine.
yes,
This
I
is
know.
out in the open.
So-
People come after us because we negotiate behind closed doors.
right, I understand. I'm not negotiating with closed doors. I'm telling you in public. I'm not trying to dictate to Fred. I can't dictate anything to Fred Bryant. We are trying to persuade FMPA that there is a path that addresses all of their concerns and doesn't put the entire transaction at risk, calling for 100% participant approval.
Okay. Well, I'm just seeing us take this is on our year. The rates are continuing to go up. When I campaigned, I wanted to get the rates down. I will continue to start bringing things up to this council to start bringing the rates down.
Great.
I would love to cancel the OUC contract. No matter what we do, we've got to cancel it anyway. That would bring the rates down.
Yeah, we need to cancel the OUC contract sooner rather than later. Excuse me, Jack.
I mean, it would bring the rates down. But unfortunately, you bring the rates down, the incentive to go to FP&L starts to go away. So that'll be a real interesting conundrum to deal with.
By the way, Mr. Winger, I just want on your comments. I don't want to imply that by terminating the contract and substituting OUC that there would be no payments to OUC. The deal that the city struck with OUC for transmitting part of the purchase price to OUC in exchange for their shouldering that burden, the financial deal would remain in place.
John, we should do at this point, as a first step. I mean, we could go through all you went through, and I would have several hours of comment. I'm not going to do that. It's not useful. But the first thing you've got a number of things coupled together. The ARC coupled together with the power supply agreements. But the first thing we should do is cancel OUC as a standalone thing and go on the market and buy power outside and buy power at market rates. Look, anytime anyone goes long on a commodity, and electrons are a commodity, I'm sorry, I'm in the rice business, I've been in the soybean business most of my life, you get trapped. I don't care whether it was the FMPA agreement, the OUC agreement, the hedges. When you're in a commodity business, you got to go short. And what we've got to do is, the one thing we can disentangle quickly is the OUC agreement. Let's get out of the OUC agreement and then let's negotiate forward and what we're going to do with FMPA.
And Mr. Winger, where are you going to come up with $20 million in termination fee to cancel that contract?
Ms. Turner, you have some other comments?
You can bond out for it and pay it back when you sell to FP&O.
You have some other comments, Ms. Turner?
I do. Mr. Iga, obviously FMPA continues to be pressing this about, well, what if OUC goes bankrupt? And what about these other contingent liabilities that may be outstanding? What recourse would FMPA have if any of their member cities went bankrupt?
Well, the contracts all for a shared liability in that case, up to 25%, so the step up. But there's bond insurance in place as well.
Because obviously some of these other cities, financial would certainly be in a far weaker position than Orlando Utilities Commission.
They may be. I mean, the city of Vero has a very strong credit rating, and OUC happens to have a stronger credit rating. Yeah. So, again, I personally don't think it's necessary, but we've offered it because it is a concern of FMPA, and we're trying to address all of their concerns in negotiating, not dictating, in negotiating a path to get this done.
Ms. Carroll, you have any comments?
Yes, I do. I would like to refute a couple comments that have been made earlier in this meeting during the council discussions. Mr. Kramer, you state that you have always been for lowering rates and that you have always felt that way. However, when you originally campaigned as a council person and you were originally selected, you were endorsed by a political action committee called Operation Clean Sweep, and those individuals were endorsed because they specifically stated they wanted
Mr.
to
Mayor,
sell
I don't
this
think attacking
electrical
another
plant
city council member is
to,
appropriate.
I'm not
That's
attacking.
fine.
I'm
That's fine.
stating
Excuse
the
me.
history. You brought up
reply.
history, and I would like to refute what you state is historical.
That is
And
true.
it's on the record, and it's true. And that is that you were originally voted to office for the sale of the electrical system to FP&L. Immediately thereafter, you chose to what is commonly known as flip and have voted against almost, I believe, every single decision that we've had with endorsing the sale to FP&L. Mr. Winger, you continually say you are for the sale of the electric, and your voting record stands, I believe, about 50-50. You continue to vote for the contract, and yet you vote against this attorney and his team who were selected by the city council in a statewide search.
I was, Ms.
Put the
Mrs.
confidence
Carroll.
in them and felt, I'm not finished, sir. We put our confidence in them, and I feel that your agenda item today is truly a slap in the face to these attorneys and these individuals who have been working so many hours on this for such a long time period.
Okay,
You were
may I answer,
stating-
please, Mrs.
Sir,
Carroll?
I'm not finished.
Just
You state that you want to determine whether, simply because there have been bumps in the road, that you want to cancel our transactional attorney. He started out his meeting today by stating that during the last month or two, they have had 3 meetings of 4 to 6 hours each, as well as a significant amount of work that has went into this. I cannot see this city today abandoning everything that they have done and what the financial constraints would be to the city and the ramifications to any deal working out with FP&L to simply throw our hands up in the air and say the sky is falling and run away from what they've done for us.
Mrs. Carroll. First,
I was first.
No, she talked to me last. I'm sorry.
Okay.
you guys work it out.
Look.
Come on now.
Whenever I voted no, it was because of a specific issue. John and I had the conversation that he needed to, in the power assignment agreements with OUC, he needed to deal with the contingent liability, not just the monthly power costs. And he said OUC didn't want to take that additional risk or cost. Maybe they do now. I don't know. And I voted against it for 13 specific reasons because they were matters of business where I did not believe that the public interest. But I voted for anything to forward this as long as it met good business parameters. I was not on the city council at the time these people were selected, and I would not have selected them. But be that as it may, I would submit to you humbly that my item on the agenda today, which I did not bring forward, which I could have brought forward, or asked to bring forward, I did not bring it forward in respect to John.
I'm sorry. What do you
No,
mean?
wait a
you didn't
minute.
bring it
No,
forward?
wait a
It's
minute.
on
I
the
have the floor.
Finish.
I would humbly submit to you that today, finally, John comes forward, although I've asked for it several times, and he gives us a path forward. And I don't think he would have done so if I hadn't put it on the agenda, quite frankly.
Mr. Kramer, you have any closing comments?
Well, what I want to say, what Tracy said was entirely true. When I ran the first time, I was in favor of having FP&L come in and look at buying our system. In fact, the first letter of intent, I had no problem signing, and I had no problem going forward with. The problem is that even to this very day, FP&L cannot present a way to get this system bought and sold. My concern is getting the rates down. I'd like to see the rates down. This issue with John Igo and seeing if we can get the deal done, I'd like to just take it, move it aside, and let us, you guys can work on it on the side, but I want the rates down. I mean, I ran the second time around on getting the rates down, and I think the people want the rates down. It's, whatever you guys want to do with FP&L and get your deal done, whatever, but I want the rates down.
Thank you, Jay.
And thank you, Jay, for admitting that. I don't believe you've admitted that in about
Tracy,
2.5 years.
I have never disputed that. You can go back to the record. I signed the very first time for 3 months, and I wanted a deal. FP&L could not bring us a deal.
Okay, guys, let's close this down. Mr. Igo, I want to thank you for your time and your update.
Thank you, Mayor.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Igo?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Mr. You want to take a 5-minute break here and let everybody, we're going to take a 10-minute break, 48. We'll be back at about 5 minutes to 11.